In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw in perspective for beginners. This is a step-by-step tutorial in which we're going to learn how to draw in 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, and 3-point perspective. Yes, there's a 3-point perspective, guys. I'm also going to show you some tips and tricks on how to set up your perspective so that you can give your drawings a more cinematic appeal and that extra oomph effect. Lastly, I want to share with you some exercises you can do to practice perspective and make it your second nature. So make sure you watch till the end so you can get everything you need to know about perspective. So welcome back to my channel, guys, and if you're new here, my name is RJ and I'm a self-taught artist and animator behind Studio De Laron, a channel dedicated to sharing with you everything I'm learning about art, animation, and drawing. So let's get started with the basics. So what is perspective, guys? Well, according to Google, it is the art of drawing solid objects on a two-dimensional surface so as to give the right impression of their height, width, depth, and position in relation to each other when viewed from a particular point of view. Yeah, that's a bit too wordy for me, guys, so let me just simplify it for you. For me, perspective is a tool for you to draw objects in 3D space and in a more realistic point of view. Well, if you still haven't get that, why don't I just show you? The very first thing we need to understand is the horizon line or the eye level. If we draw a line to represent our line of sight, we can call that line the horizon line. This is also where the vanishing point goes, and what this line simply tells us is that depending on the location of the object, whether it is above, on the side, or below this line, we can see more planes of that object. We can use a cube and place it in 3 locations to fully understand this concept. If we place the cube directly in front of us, we can clearly see the front plane of the cube, but we can't see the sides, top, or the bottom. If we place the object below this line, our eyes will be able to see the top plane of this object. And this goes the same if we place this object on top of this line, then we can see the bottom plane of this cube. Now let's actually draw a horizon line and place the vanishing point in the middle. This is called 1-point perspective. And again, if we start to draw a box in different locations, we can see more of the box. We can place the box on the right and left and see the side planes. We can also place the box in one of the corners and see 2 more planes. All we have to do is to follow these converging lines as we construct our objects in space. These converging lines meet at the vanishing point. The height and width will follow the usual horizontal and vertical planes, but the depth will always follow this perspective line going to the vanishing point. Now let's see what a 2-point perspective is. 2-point perspective is simply when we have 2 vanishing points in the horizon line. This usually happens when we start to see objects rotating towards us. Suddenly, the planes that we see are no longer flat, but rather follow the perspective line to either of the 2 vanishing points. One could argue that the true perspective is the 2-point perspective, but it really depends on how we look at things. There's even something called 1.5 perspective, which I'm going to share with you at the tips and tricks portion of this video, so stay tuned for that. Anyway, going back to 2-point perspective, understand that the width and depth of any object will converge to either of the 2 vanishing points, so the only thing that really remains parallel is the height. The location of the vanishing points will depend on the object's rotation or how you look at the object. If we stand directly in front of the edge of the cube, we can assume that the distance of the 2 vanishing points from the center of our vision will be the same. However, if we rotate it slightly or even move our line of sight a bit, the vanishing point will be adjusted accordingly. Also, it's good to note that usually the vanishing point is very far to the side and ideally it should not be at the frame of the shot. And now let's move on to 3-point perspective. And yes guys, there's a 3-point perspective. This type of perspective happens when we start looking up or down. This is mainly used in a worm's eye view or bird's eye view kind of point of view, but the same concept applies. The further it is from us, the smaller it is. So when we start looking up a building, for example, the edge of the top of that building usually will be smaller than the bottom edge of the building, at least from our own perspective. This is because the side edge of the building that represents the height is now following the invisible vanishing point that is usually in line with our line of sight. This goes the same if we stand on top of the building and look down. The bottom of the building will appear smaller than the top edge of the building. Setting up this third vanishing point is basically just creating a point way above or below our horizon line, even above or below the frame of our illustration or composition. With this vanishing point established, we can now see the height of the building with converging lines towards its corresponding vanishing point. Now that you know what perspective is all about and how it works in different kinds of perspective, let me now show you some tips and tricks on how to use this tool to make your drawings more cinematic. We are talking about how to compose your shots here using perspective. And the very first tip I have for you is never put the horizon line in the middle of your composition because your drawings will look flat. It always looks best if we put it somewhere below or above a third. And this is something I learned from Ethan Becker, who reviewed my submission in one of his drawing challenges. He talks about good composition in his class, which I am a part of, so just trust me on this because this tip is not actually my own. It is something that came from professional working in the industry, and this is not only from Ethan Becker but also from other people working in Netflix shows, in movies and TV shows that uses this technique. The next tip I'm going to share with you is something that sits between the 1-point perspective and 2-point perspective, and that is the 1.5-point perspective. This combines the two to create a more dynamic composition for your drawings. What it is basically a 2-point perspective, but the one vanishing point is within the frame while the other is as far as it can go. The great thing about this perspective is that you get a sense of dynamic elements depending on where you place them on the frame. Combined with the 3-point perspective, this works like magic to create an ominous vibe scene of a building standing very tall. Another tip, which is like the combination of the first two tips, is placing the vanishing point in one of these 4 areas. This tip is something I learned from Rad Seacrest, creator of Kipo, who shared it in one of his classes in Rad How To class, which you can find down in the description below. The horizon line being on top third shows more of the ground plane if you have a wider shot of an outside environment. Another tip I could give you is creating a slight angle for the horizon line, which creates a composition called Dutch angle. This type of composition is used as one of the many cinematic techniques to portray an easiness or tension in the subject of the shot. The last bit of tip I want to give to you, which is more like a technique to draw perspective lines quicker, is what my college professor would call champective. This is basically a way of drawing perspective in a more loose way. We don't necessarily have to draw a lot of lines for our perspective grid to make sure our perspective is correct. We just have to make sure that we do our best in making sure that the lines we are drawing are converging at a single point. We are basically eyeballing it rather than making an accurate grid line. For the purposes of creating storyboards, which is what I'm working on right now, this is enough, but if you are somewhat more of an illustrator, you can always spend a few minutes setting up your perspective grid lines. However, I think it's better if we just have a few lines to signify the kind of perspective we are using instead of having a lot of lines. This trains your eye to look at things in 3D without relying on too many lines. And the way to practice this is to grab scenes from movies and draw the layout or perspective grid lines for that particular scene. You can also do this when doing your film studies, which helps you hit two birds in one stone. You are training yourself to see the perspective of the scene, which ultimately helps you in your own drawings. And you are also training yourself to look at things in a more cinematic way. These are just tips you can do on your own to really dive in deeper on how perspective works and train yourself to use this tool and create drawings in a more cinematic way. Thank you guys for watching, and this is only part 1 of my perspective series. And in this series, I'm going to show you how to draw objects and figures in perspective. So if you like the content I'm creating, feel free to subscribe, hit the notification bell button so you don't miss any of the videos that I'll be posting. Also, comment down below what kind of videos you'd like to see in the future of this channel. I'll see you guys in the next video, and as always, keep on creating so you can make this world a better place with your imagination.